My daughter gave her mother-in-law a diamond and a luxury trip. I got a Chinese keychain. A month later, she came asking me for help. When Rachel was 6, she once told me I was the safest person in the world. I was mending her stuffed bear's torn leg with a needle and thread while she sat curled at my feet. I remember the warmth of that moment like it happened yesterday. Now, I wonder if it ever truly belonged to me. At 66, I've grown used to early mornings. The stillness before the town wakes, the hush of Asheville fog settling over the mountains, the creak of old floorboards beneath slippered feet. My house, once bustling with PTA meetings and science project disasters, had grown quieter in recent years. I didn't mind. I told myself I liked the peace. 2 years ago, Rachel and her husband Kyle asked if they could move into the guest house, just for a little while, they said. Rent had gone up, and the kids needed stability. I said yes without hesitation. I stocked the fridge, cleared out the closets, even repainted the walls myself. I made room. Since then, I paid the utility bills for both houses, kept the pantry full, and babysat Emma and Jack 5 days a week. I told myself it was family. That helping was love. That I was still needed. On Mother's Day morning, Rachel came into the kitchen, her face lit not by joy, but by the pale glow of her phone. "We're heading to Kyle's mom's for brunch," she said without looking up. "You can come if you want." The words dropped like stones. No smile. No gesture of welcome. Just a flat offer thrown over her shoulder as she walked out. I nodded and said, "All right, dear." But inside, something folded. Quietly. A corner of myself turned inward. That afternoon, I sat alone on the back porch with a lukewarm cup of tea. The azaleas had just begun to bloom. The guest house lights flicked on, and I saw Kyle carrying a dish to the car. Rachel followed, dressed in a pale green dress that used to be mine. I remember thinking it still fit her beautifully. They didn't look back. I didn't know it then, but that small moment, the absence of warmth in her voice, the absence of space in their plans, was the beginning of something I would no longer ignore. Brenda's house sat like a polished jewel on a hill outside town, the kind of place with window boxes that matched the season and a brass plaque by the mailbox. I had only been there once before, years ago, for a baby shower I wasn't expected to stay long at. This time, I stood quietly by the garden path, watching guests in linen and pastel file through the open door. Rachel had offered me a ride, then forgotten. So I took the bus. It dropped me 2 blocks away. I walked the rest, slow but steady, careful not to scuff the shoes I still referred to as my church pair. The brunch was already in full swing when I stepped inside. Brenda was all smiles, gold earrings, soft curls, and a laugh that sounded rehearsed. Her dining table was a spread of catered delicacies. People mingled easily, clinking glasses, complimenting the harpist stationed by the bay window. Rachel spotted me, waved without walking over. She looked right through me before turning back to Brenda. I found a seat near the edge of the patio where the sun didn't quite reach. The cushion felt damp underneath me, and I perched on the edge. I watched as Brenda laughed and clutched Rachel's hand, as if they shared something precious, something only the two of them could understand. Then came the gifts. Brenda sat in a wicker chair surrounded by family. Kyle handed her a velvet box first. Rachel leaned close, her voice bright and carefully modulated for the crowd. "Mom, we wanted you to have something really special." The box opened with a snap. A diamond necklace glinted in the morning light. There was a hush, then applause. Brenda dabbed at her eyes. A few guests took photos. Next, Kyle passed her a slim travel folder. "Sedona," he announced. "All-inclusive spa trip. Massage package included." Brenda clutched the papers like a winning lottery ticket. She hugged Kyle, kissed Rachel's cheek. Everyone smiled. Then Rachel turned to me. "Oh, and for you, Mom." She held out a small plastic bag. A thin string tied at the top. I took it gently. Inside was a red keychain, plastic, shaped like a panda, with the word lucky in gold block letters stamped on the belly. "We saw it in one of those quirky Chinatown shops," she said with a laugh. "Thought it was fun. No card. No ribbon. Just the bag." I nodded. "Thank you." But by then, Rachel was already looking elsewhere. Brenda was telling a story about how Kyle had almost missed his own birth because of a golf game. Laughter echoed off the patio walls. I turned the keychain over in my hand. The gold letters had already begun to chip. I tucked it into my purse and smoothed my dress. No one noticed me again that afternoon. After the gifts, they moved on to a toast. Kyle stood and raised his glass. "To strong mothers," he said, looking directly at Brenda. "Who show us what generosity really looks like." I sat still. Later, as guests started drifting toward the dessert table, I rose and walked back through the house. I didn't say goodbye. No one stopped me. I walked the 2 blocks to the bus stop. The wind had picked up. I held my purse tighter, the keychain string catching slightly on my fingers. At the stop, a woman with a stroller asked if the seat beside me was taken. I said no. She smiled. I didn't return it. That night, I made soup from what was left in the fridge. Rachel didn't bring the children by. I didn't ask why. The next morning, I went out early to water the garden near the guest house. I liked the quiet before their day began. But as I turned off the hose, I heard Kyle's voice through the open guesthouse window. "I don't care what the realtor said," he said, sharp. "If Helen sells the place, we're finished. I can't get a loan without her backing us." There was a pause. "I'm serious. She's old school. If she finds out we're even thinking about refinancing without her name, we're screwed." I stepped back slowly, careful not to let my footsteps crunch on gravel. I had never mentioned selling the house. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, the keychain laid out in front of me. The panda stared up with that frozen grin, the word lucky dulled by fingerprints. They weren't just relying on me. They were planning around me. Expecting me to remain, to provide, to not ask questions. I had paid for Rachel's college tuition, quietly, without ceremony. I covered their wedding. Rachel wanted peonies flown in from Oregon. I found a vendor. When their first house fell through, I gave them the down payment for the second, called it a bridging gift. Kyle hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would bruise. I kept the receipt anyway. Then came the business loan when Kyle's landscaping company floundered. The medical bills when Rachel had Emma. The car repairs. The holiday flights. Every little bump, I filled in the gaps. I told myself it was love. That it would come back to me in gratitude, in kindness. Instead, it came back in a keychain. That night, I opened the filing cabinet in the study. I pulled out old bank statements, checkbook ledgers, handwritten notes on yellow pads. Receipts from hardware stores, private tutors, pediatricians. The numbers added up like sediment. Over 15 years, I had spent close to $380,000 on them. And that didn't include groceries, gifts, or my time. I didn't cry. I didn't confront. I simply began taking inventory, not just of money, but of dignity, of presence, of how far I'd let things go under the guise of love. They hadn't stolen from me. I had handed myself over, piece by piece. And they never once looked down to see what I was losing. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was upset, though perhaps I should have been, but because something deeper had settled inside me. Not pain. Not even betrayal. Just a quiet, undeniable clarity. I rose before dawn, before the birds began their warbling outside the kitchen window, and put on a sweater over my nightgown. I made tea. I didn't even turn the light on. The silence suited me. That morning, I didn't bring the kids their usual oatmeal and banana slices. I didn't knock on the guesthouse door to see if Rachel needed help with the morning rush. I simply didn't go. By 9:30, the first text came. "Hey, Mom, you forgot to bring the snacks?" I didn't reply. 10 minutes later, a follow-up. Are you okay? I turned the phone face down and went back to sorting through the file folders. It's strange how many little transactions a life contains. Every small expense told a story. $600 for Rachel's emergency dental work. $1,200 for Kyle's accounting help during tax season. $75 here. $30 there. A trail of small rescues. And not a single thank you card in the drawer. The more I looked, the more invisible I felt. Later that week, I called a realtor. Her name was Marla, and she had a soft voice and the kind of silence that felt respectful. I told her I wanted to list the house. Just to explore options, I said. She didn't ask questions. After we hung up, I sat in the living room with a yellow legal pad on my lap and began to draw out columns. Not for budgeting, but for ending. The guest house, I wrote. Landscaping contract. Grocery supplement. Childcare. All these invisible threads that tied me to them, each with a clean line drawn through. I called my accountant the next morning. Said I was restructuring. Asked him to dissolve the informal contract I had signed with Kyle's business, which I'd been subsidizing for over a year. He hesitated. Are you sure, Helen? You've been their cornerstone. Yes, I said plainly. And cornerstones crack, too. Rachel showed up 2 days later, just after dinner. She didn't knock, just came through the back door like always. I was sitting at the table, bills sorted into 3 neat piles. Her face was pale. Mom, she said, half laughing, Kyle says you canceled the landscaping contracts. And the bookkeeping referrals. What's going on? I'm restructuring, I said, echoing my words from earlier. She blinked. You could have said something. I looked up at her calmly. I've talked enough for both of us over the years. That was the moment something flickered in her eyes, not anger, not yet. Confusion. Maybe even fear. Because I wasn't playing the role anymore. She looked around the kitchen, eyes grazing the empty stove, the clear counter. There were no pots simmering, no extra lunch bags packed for the next day. Rachel said quietly, Are you upset about the Mother's Day thing? That was just. I mean, it was a joke. It wasn't a joke, I said, without venom. It was a choice. She opened her mouth, then closed it. So what happens now? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The tea kettle began to whistle behind me. The next day, the call started. Kyle, of course. His messages were less veiled. You can't just pull out like this. We built everything around those contracts. Do you know what this does to our budget? No apology. No ownership. Just numbers. Always numbers. Then came Rachel again. You're being unfair. You're punishing us over a silly misunderstanding. I didn't reply. A few days later, she showed up again. This time she was crying. We'll pay rent, she said, her voice catching. We'll help out more. Please, just don't sell. Don't leave us. I folded the dish towel over my hands, letting the heat from the sink water settle in my knuckles before replying. I'm not punishing you, I said softly. I'm freeing myself. She flinched, like I'd slapped her. But I hadn't. I'd simply told the truth. Later that week, I changed all the locks. Kyle called me paranoid. Rachel tried to leave a note taped to the back door. I tossed it unopened into the bin. The final straw came the following Monday. I returned home from my meeting with Marla. The house had officially been listed, papers signed and notarized, and found my office door open. Inside, Rachel. Papers spread across my desk. My laptop unlocked. What are you doing? I asked, my voice like gravel. She turned sharply, her face flushed. I just needed to understand what's going on. Why you're doing this? You're scaring us. You impersonated me on a business call, I said. I have the voicemail. Rachel's eyes widened. I was trying to help. No, I said. You were trying to control what wasn't yours. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then finally, tears brimming, she whispered, We're scared, Mom. Don't sell. Please. Just give us more time. I studied her carefully, the same face I once kissed goodnight every evening, the same eyes that used to search mine for answers after every scraped knee. No, I said gently. You've had years. I left her standing there, surrounded by everything she thought she was entitled to. But I was done giving. The house grew quiet after that. Not just in sound, but in feeling. A quiet that spread like fog through the rooms, soft and heavy. For the first time in years, I let it linger. I stopped cooking more than I needed. One portion, sometimes two, depending on whether I felt like leftovers. I stopped stocking their favorite snacks in the pantry. Emma's apple juice, Jack's crackers, no more refills. Rachel never commented. Kyle did once, loud enough through the open guesthouse window that he must have wanted me to hear, Guess we're on our own now. He wasn't wrong. I withdrew from the rhythms that had once defined our shared days. No more daily school pickups. No weekend grocery lists slipped under my door. No calendar reminders of dentist appointments. They would adjust. Or they wouldn't. The strange part was how quickly they stopped asking. Instead, I found myself in my study, surrounded by files. The carpet beneath the chair had worn thin over time, a patch of dullness in an otherwise warm room. I spread papers across the desk, tax returns, ledgers, signed agreements. For years, I had told myself I was keeping records for just in case. Now I saw the truth. I'd been preparing to account for my own invisibility. Each page was a small confession. And a small betrayal. Rachel's tuition, covered in full. Kyle's business tax penalties, resolved by a quiet check. The down payment for their first home, documented with a handwritten note from Kyle that simply said, We'll pay it back. Soon. It was dated 9 years ago. They hadn't paid back a cent. When I totaled everything, loans, gifts, expenses, I reached nearly $380,000. I ran my fingers along the edge of the final column. A part of me wanted to cry. But another part, the deeper one, the older one, simply nodded. I had known. I just hadn't admitted it aloud. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to bed without setting an alarm. No early morning prep. No child's schedule to track. The silence was not emptiness. It was space. And it let me sleep through until morning without dreaming. 2 weeks later, I met Marla at a coffee shop downtown. She wore a navy jacket and had a folder with crisp tabs. Offers are coming in quickly, she said. Good ones. I nodded. I don't need the highest bid. I need the cleanest exit. She smiled kindly, but I could see the question forming behind her eyes. Why are you really selling? I didn't explain. I had learned the value of keeping certain things unsaid. Back home, the guesthouse lights stayed off most mornings. Rachel had taken to driving the kids to school instead of walking them. Kyle worked longer hours, or said he did. The air between us thickened, but no one addressed it. That suited me fine. I contacted my lawyer, Mr. Denning, and asked him to begin drafting the documents for the sale. He didn't pry, only asked for updated information. I appreciated that. In the meantime, I started packing. Slowly. Quietly. One box at a time. Books first. Then photo albums, carefully labeled. A few framed prints from the hallway. I didn't rush. I wanted to feel every item, not to mourn it, but to remember who I had been when I chose it. I left the dining room untouched. They still used it sometimes when Brenda came over. I hadn't stepped foot in it since Mother's Day. One afternoon, as I was sealing a box of dishes, Emma wandered into the kitchen. Grandma, are you moving? Her voice was light, uncertain. I paused. Yes, sweetie. Soon. Her mouth twisted, as if she were trying to understand a word in a language she didn't speak. Are you going far? I knelt in front of her. Far enough to be new. But not so far you can't call. She nodded solemnly. Then, surprisingly, she wrapped her arms around my neck and said, okay. No one else asked. Not until the for sale sign went up. It happened on a Monday. Marla arrived just after noon. Kyle was mowing the front lawn. He stopped halfway when he saw her hammering the stake into the ground. He marched up the driveway, his face tight with forced calm. Is this official? Marla didn't look up. Listings live as of this morning. Kyle turned toward the main house. I watched him from the kitchen window, his fists clenched at his sides. That evening, he banged on my back door. You're really selling, he said, skipping any pretense. I opened the door and stepped aside. Yes. You didn't think to tell us? I think you've known. He shook his head, pacing. We thought it was a threat. A tactic. Not this. I said nothing. Silence has its own kind of power. I'd learned that from the years I spent speaking softly to be heard. This is our home now, he said, lower. Our kid's home. No, I said gently. It's mine. And I'm choosing to leave it before it forgets who I am. He stared at me. Then, without another word, walked out. Rachel didn't come that night. She didn't text. But the next morning, as I stood in the yard clipping dead blooms from the rose bushes, I saw her standing at the edge of the guesthouse porch, watching. She didn't wave. Neither did I. It was the clearest we'd been in months. The silence didn't last long. Within days of the sign going up, Rachel began leaving notes in my mailbox. Not letters, notes. Post-its, scraps of torn paper, messages hastily written in pen or marker. Short sentences that drifted between concern and accusation. Are you sure this is necessary? Kyle says we should talk. We're not trying to hurt you. I didn't respond. Then came the calls, first one a day, then 2, then 5. Her voice on voicemail shifted tone with each message. One was warm, almost pleading. The next clipped, like a scolding teacher. Another, quieter, sounded nearly tearful. We'll pay rent, Mom. We'll help out more. Just don't leave. But it was Kyle who finally stopped pretending. He knocked one afternoon, hard and fast, like someone trying to prove a point. You know we built our whole year around that landscaping contract, he said as soon as I opened the door. You're cutting us off? I didn't invite him in. I'm choosing to take care of myself for once, I replied. He stood there, jaw tight. After everything we've done for you? I didn't laugh. But the breath I let out almost sounded like one. I closed the door before he could say more. The next morning, I found Rachel on my porch. She didn't knock. Just sat there on the swing with her hands folded, like a child waiting for permission to speak. When I opened the door, she stood quickly. I'm sorry, she said. Not about the sale. I get it, I do. I just. Her eyes were red. She looked thinner than usual. I thought we were doing okay. We just got comfortable. I nodded. You did. We're not bad people, Mom. I didn't say she was. She went on. It was just easier to let you handle things. You always did. And we thought, maybe it was what you wanted. I studied her face, still young, still my daughter, but distant now. As if we had lived side by side and never really met. I wanted to be respected, I said finally. Not just relied upon. Rachel looked down, then away. I miss when things were simple. They were never simple, I said. I just didn't speak up. She left after that. I didn't invite her in. The house felt fuller without the noise. A week passed. Then another. The for sale sign turned to pending. The papers were signed, the inspection cleared. The new owners, a retired couple from Vermont, sent a letter with a photo of their dog, thanking me in advance for the roses out back. It made me smile. I packed more deliberately now. Fewer boxes. Fewer attachments. I sold what I didn't need, donated what I wouldn't miss, and wrapped what little remained with care. The guest house stayed quiet. No more knocks. No more notes. Then one evening, as the sky turned that soft bruised purple shade over the Blue Ridge, I returned from an appointment to find my home office door open. Rachel was inside. My desk was scattered, folders opened, drawers partially emptied, my laptop glowing with an unfamiliar login screen. "Rachel?" I asked, my voice low. She turned sharply, startled. I was just looking for answers. Trying to understand. "You opened my financial records. You're selling everything, cutting us off. I don't understand how you could just do that." "You impersonated me on a business call," I said. "That's not concern. That's desperation." Her mouth opened, then closed. "We're scared, Mom," she said, finally. "Don't sell. Please. Just give us more time." I stepped into the room and gently closed the laptop. "No," I said quietly. "You've had years." She looked at me like she didn't recognize the person in front of her. But I recognized myself. That night, I sat at the kitchen table again, tea in hand, the keychain lying next to the mug. The panda's paint had begun to flake. I traced the word lucky with one finger. I didn't feel bitter. I didn't feel vengeful. Just done. Not with Rachel. Not even with Kyle. Done with waiting to be seen. The house was nearly empty when the moving truck arrived. A few final boxes, neatly labeled. Most of the furniture had been donated, sold, or passed on. I kept what I could carry and what I couldn't bear to leave. I didn't tell Rachel the exact day I was leaving. I think she suspected, but she didn't ask. Kyle didn't speak to me again after our last conversation. The children had stopped coming by. No goodbye, no final hug, not even a puzzled question about why Grandma's closet looked strange. But I had made my peace with that. I handed the keys to Marla just before noon. She walked the room slowly with me one last time. "It's a good house," she said. "You made it feel like a place someone could grow." I nodded. "Someone did." She looked at me as if she wanted to ask more, but didn't. I drove myself north. It took 2 days. I stopped along the way at little diners and gas stations, the kind where no one asks where you're from, just whether you want coffee with that. I liked the anonymity. I liked the silence. The cottage I found was modest. White clapboard, low-sloped roof, with weathered shutters painted the softest shade of blue. A single bedroom. A kitchen that smelled faintly of salt. The view from the window held nothing but trees, sky, and the distant glimmer of sea. It was enough. I signed a 6-month lease. Paid in full. No cosigners. No family. The first week, I joined a pottery class at the community center. My bowls came out crooked, soft around the edges. I liked them more that way. I started walking each morning, early, before the gulls grew loud, before the roads filled. The air by the coast was sharper, cleaner. Each step felt like breathing differently. At the small library 2 blocks from the cottage, I signed up to volunteer. 3 mornings a week, I shelved books, answered questions about printer settings, and smiled at children tracing letters with stubby fingers. No one asked about my past. No one needed to. I began sleeping through the night. There were no urgent knocks on my door. No lists of errands. No calendars pinned with other people's appointments. I made soup when I wanted to. Toast when I didn't. I watched birds gather at the feeder I hung on the back porch, their tiny wings fluttering like secrets. I didn't hear from Rachel. For a while, I checked my phone out of habit. Then less. Then not at all. The keychain stayed with me, tucked in a drawer beside my bed. I didn't look at it often, but I didn't throw it away. It wasn't a symbol of pain anymore. Just a memory of the moment I woke up. I kept a small folder in the bottom drawer of the kitchen. Inside were copies of the sale documents, the revised will, the list of automatic payments I'd once made. I opened it once or twice, then stopped. I didn't need proof anymore. Sometimes, when I passed families in the market or watched parents wrangle toddlers into raincoats, I felt a pang, not of jealousy, not even of regret. Just something like a hollow echo. A reminder of a room I used to live in that no longer had a door. But it didn't ache. It was a clean kind of absence. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry, I found a single baby sock caught in the corner of a pillowcase. It must have traveled from Asheville, tucked deep in the folds. It was Emma's. Pale yellow, with a faded bunny stitched near the ankle. I sat down and held it in my lap. My fingers brushed the worn fabric slowly. I didn't cry. I didn't press it to my face like they do in movies. I folded it gently, placed it in the drawer next to the keychain, and closed it. That night, the wind howled along the coast. The sea, visible in slivers through the pine trees, churned like a restless sleeper. But inside, the cottage stayed still. Safe. I made tea, sat by the window, and wrote a postcard to no one. Found a place by the water, I wrote. It's small. But I fit. A week after I mailed the change of address form to my bank and Medicare office, I received my first piece of mail at the cottage. A glossy flyer for a seafood festival, and a handwritten envelope with no return address. I knew Rachel's handwriting before I even opened it. The way she still curled her Y's like she did in middle school, the way the loops in her R's never fully closed. Inside was a card. Simple. A watercolor of a lighthouse on the front. Blank inside, except for one short sentence. We didn't know how to do it right. No, dear Mom. No apology. No promise. I placed it beside the kettle and let it sit there for a day. Then I slipped it into the drawer with the sock and the keychain. It wasn't that I didn't feel something, it's that I didn't know what to do with the feeling anymore. It no longer had a place. Later that week, I was in town picking up some groceries when my phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number, but the tone was unmistakable. It's Kyle. We just want to know you're okay. I didn't respond. Another came the next morning. We're sorry. We didn't mean to push you away. The kids miss you. Then Rachel again. I've been going through your old recipes. Emma wants to make your cornbread. Please call. I read them all. I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to punish. Because I no longer needed to explain. 2 days later, I got a call from Marla. You won't believe who just called me, she said with a soft laugh. Your daughter. I stayed silent. She wanted to know where you moved. Said she had something urgent to send you. I asked, did you tell her? Of course not, Marla said. But she asked about forwarding info. I said I'd pass along anything, if you wanted. I told her no. Then thanked her. That night, I left my phone on the porch and walked the shoreline path alone. The moonlight cast everything in silver. It made even my hands look unfamiliar. As I stood there, waves brushing the rocks below, I thought about the last time I'd felt needed, and how closely that feeling had been tied to being used. I used to think love meant service. That if I kept doing, kept giving, I'd be safe from abandonment. But the more I gave, the more invisible I became. Rachel had once called me the glue. Said I held the family together. But glue dries. Glue cracks. And no one thanks the glue when the picture is framed and hung. The next day, I received a second letter. This one thicker. Inside were photos, Emma holding up a crayon drawing, Jack in his school uniform, Rachel and Kyle at some fundraising event. On the back of the envelope, a note in different handwriting. "We're not asking for money. Just time." I stared at the words. Once, those would have broken me open. Now, they only brought a tired kind of ache. I placed the photos in a folder, sealed it, and slid it into a filing box. Not out of malice. Just closure. I spent the rest of the afternoon weeding the patch of garden behind the cottage. It wasn't much, just a line of young rosemary and some basil. But it grew. At sundown, I stood and wiped my hands. The dirt had worked its way into the creases of my skin. It looked like age. Like work. I liked the way it felt. That evening, the kettle whistled just as the wind picked up. I poured a cup of tea, opened the window slightly, and breathed in salt and pine. There was no music. No television. Just the breath of the sea and the settling hum of a house holding its own weight. When I finally went to bed, I left the porch light off. No one was coming. And I didn't need them to. 2 months had passed since the move, and still, the quiet felt new. I had found a rhythm to my days. Mornings began with a walk down to the rocky stretch of coast beyond the pine break. I wore the same windbreaker most days, the one with the frayed sleeve cuff that I couldn't bring myself to mend. It felt honest, like me. After the walk, I stopped at the cafe on the corner, a quiet place with a kind barista who never asked more than he needed to. There, I sipped coffee slowly, with no deadlines waiting behind it. I began reading again. Real books, thick with story, not just the clipped emails and post-it notes that had once filled my kitchen counters. On Wednesdays, I shelved books at the library. On Fridays, I sat in on a ceramics class, where everyone was kind and no one cared who you had been. The clay didn't ask questions. It just waited for your hands. I started writing, too. Not a journal. Not letters. Just small notes to myself, folded and tucked into a box I kept beside my bed. Things I'd always meant to remember. You're not just useful. You're whole. Silence is not the same as peace. But sometimes it leads there. That box, to me, was a kind of anchor. The cottage was small, but not lonely. The walls didn't echo. The light fell through the windows like it belonged. I hadn't felt that way in a home for a long time. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped by with a pie. Rhubarb and strawberry. Her name was Claire, a widow like me, with kind eyes and a habit of repeating herself when she was nervous. "I just figured," she said, setting the dish down on the stoop, "that you might like something sweet on a Sunday." We sat on my porch and shared a slice in silence. She didn't ask about family. I didn't offer. There was a comfort in being seen only as who you are now, not the stories that brought you here. Later, she told me about a group that met once a month to talk about books and sometimes just life. She said I was welcome. I nodded. Said I'd think about it. I never used to have the freedom to say, "I'll think about it." One evening, I went through a box I'd packed without much thought. Inside were Rachel's old drawings, scribbles from when she was 4, careful letters from when she was 10. One showed me holding a flower, my stick figure arms stretched wide. "Mommy is kind," it read in crayon. I traced the letters with one finger. I didn't cry. I placed the drawing back in the envelope and set it in the drawer beside the keychain, the baby sock, the folded card. Artifacts. Not burdens. I hadn't spoken to Rachel in weeks. She'd tried. I knew she had. A handful of texts, a voicemail or two. But I no longer lived on the tether of someone else's urgency. My love for her hadn't disappeared. But the version of me she had depended on, the one who made herself smaller, quieter, endlessly available, that woman no longer lived here. I used to believe that letting go was a failure. Now, I understood it could be an act of mercy. To them. And to myself. One morning, as I swept the front porch, I noticed a single feather caught between the boards. White, tipped with gray. I picked it up and twirled it gently in my fingers. I'd read somewhere that birds molt not only because they're damaged, but because they outgrow their old feathers. Even wings, it seems, have to be shed to grow. I tucked the feather into the box with the rest. That evening, I opened the window wide. Let the cool wind move through every room. I turned off every light but one, the small lamp by my reading chair. I sat there for a long time. Not waiting. Just present. Just whole. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It was late morning, and the wind off the water had carried a smell of pine and salt into the cottage. I had just come in from a walk, hands still chilled, when I found it on the porch, tucked between a flyer for lawn care services and a catalog I hadn't asked for. I knew the handwriting immediately. Rachel's. Slower than before. Careful. Hesitant. The envelope was cream-colored, no return address, but my full name written out in her familiar, looping print. I stood there for a moment, unmoving. Then I brought it inside and sat at the kitchen table. I didn't open it right away. I made tea, the same way I always did, loose leaves in a strainer, steeped for exactly 5 minutes. I washed a bowl, dried it, and set it on the rack. I waited until the house was quiet enough that I could hear my own breath. Then I opened it. The paper was thick, folded once. 1 page. No greeting. No date. Just a voice on a page. "I'm sorry," it began. "Not because you left. But because I finally understand what I took from you without ever giving anything back." I read the sentence twice. "Kyle and I are divorcing. I work part-time at the local school now. It's hard, but it's real. And for the first time, I see what it means to carry everything for someone else." There was a long paragraph about the children. About how Emma still asked why Grandma wasn't at the garden anymore. About Jack's new habit of saving things, small stones, crumpled receipts. He says they're pieces of people he doesn't want to forget. "I didn't see you clearly before," Rachel wrote. "I saw what you gave, but not what it cost you." She ended it simply. "I hope you're safe. I hope you're well. I hope you don't hate us." I folded the letter slowly. My hands didn't tremble. There was no rush of anger, no tears. Only stillness. I didn't feel vindicated. Or wounded. Just steady. I looked out the window where the sea glimmered beyond the line of trees. Somewhere out there, waves were rolling over stones that had been shaped by time, by pressure, by loss. I placed the letter in the same drawer as the others. With the panda keychain. The baby sock. The feather. Each item, once a wound, now just a marker. A measure of the distance I'd traveled. Later that afternoon, I walked into town to return a library book. On the way, I passed the shop that sold handmade candles and herbs. In the window was a small sign. "Home is where you stop explaining yourself." I stopped and smiled. It felt like the kind of thing I would have dismissed once, too sentimental, too obvious. But now, it just felt true. I bought a candle. The scent was something soft and earthy. Moss and ash. They called it ember. That night, I lit it by the window and let the flame flicker against the dark. There was no ache in my chest. No sense of needing to answer Rachel. I didn't owe her that anymore. Somewhere, she was learning. Becoming. Growing through the discomfort I had carried for her for so long. And I was here. Still. Whole. Home. That night, I sat in the stillness of my small cottage, tea cooling beside me, the candle flickering in its shallow dish. Outside, the trees whispered in the wind. The sea, though distant, hummed its low, steady lullaby. And I thought, quietly, without rush, about what it meant to leave. Not to run. Not to abandon. But to remove oneself gently, finally, from the center of a story that no longer offered shelter. There was no dramatic final conversation. No slam of doors. Just the slow, deliberate withdrawal from a role I had played too long. Mother. Helper. Provider. Apology. I had lived as the cushion between other people's needs for so many years that I forgot I had bones of my own. Structure. Silence. Choice. And when I stopped offering, they were startled, not by what I said, but by what I no longer gave. The warmth. The food. The soft landing. I think Rachel loved me in the way a thirsty person loves a well. As long as it poured, she drank. But she never asked how deep I'd gone, how dark the water felt some days. Now she was learning. And I was learning too. That peace is not loud. It doesn't arrive with applause or validation. It settles in with quiet hands, in small rituals, the slow turning of pages, the folding of laundry that belongs only to you, the absence of a voice calling from another room with a need dressed up as love. I still think of them, sometimes. Not with anger. Just as a shape that once filled my life. A house I lived in. A language I spoke fluently until the day I stopped understanding myself in it. I still wear the necklace Richard gave me on our 30th anniversary. Still keep the chipped blue mug Rachel made in kindergarten. Still hold memories gently. But I don't go back. I don't explain. And I don't wait for recognition. Because I have learned, some stories do not need to be corrected. Only ended. I didn't disappear. I simply stepped out of their story. And into my own. At last.